My 7-year-old grandson had accidentally taken his mother's work iPad to school. His teacher called me. "You need to come right away." I rushed there as fast as I could. The police were already present. An officer led me into another room. "What we found inside is terrible. You should see it for yourself." When I looked, I couldn't believe it. I'm glad you're here. If you're listening to this story, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. That morning, I had woken up in the calm of my 67th year. My mornings usually drift by slowly. The old radio on the kitchen shelf murmured the news. Today about a traffic jam downtown. Suddenly the phone rang, sharp and jarring, shattering the quiet. I jumped, spilling a little coffee on the table, wiped my hands quickly on my worn apron, and answered. On the other end was my grandson's teacher, Miss Susan, who taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. Her voice was shaky, rushed, as if she were holding back panic. "Mrs. Sandra, you need to come to school right now." "What happened? Is Jimmy okay?" "Something serious with Jimmy." My heart clenched like someone was squeezing it. A flood of dreadful thoughts ran through my mind. "Oh Lord, he fell. He's hurt." "Please, tell me," I nearly screamed. I pictured Jimmy lying somewhere, knees bleeding, or worse, hurt in an accident on the playground. Susan hesitated, her voice awkward. "It's not that, but you need to come to understand." I didn't have time to ask more. Only one thought consumed me. I had to get to Jimmy. I grabbed the old shawl hanging by the door without even turning off the stove or checking the boiling coffee pot. I ran out into the street, legs trembling but forcing myself to move faster. The world around me blurred. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding. In the cramped taxi, the driver glanced at me in the rear view. "Mirror, is it an emergency, ma'am?" he asked. I didn't answer, just shook my head, eyes fixed on the gridlock outside the window. In my mind, I saw Jimmy, that little curly-haired boy who always clutched my hand on walks. If something happened to him, I didn't know how I would go on. Jimmy was my light, the reason I still felt a flicker of joy each morning despite life's hardships. When the taxi stopped at the school gate, the scene froze me. 2 police cars sat at the entrance, red and blue lights flashing like knives to my chest. Some parents were gathered nearby, whispering with a mix of curiosity and worry. I caught a few words: police, device, serious. Each word hit like a hammer. I pushed through the crowd, nearly running to the office. As soon as I stepped in, I saw Jimmy. He was curled up on a wooden chair, clutching his backpack as if it were the only shield left against the world. His eyes were red and swollen, his little face full of fear. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to say it would be okay, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. The principal, Mr. Ellis, stepped out from behind his desk, his face anxious. He spoke softly. "Mrs. Sandra, we found that Jimmy brought a device to class that contained some very strange things." Before I could understand, the door swung open. A tall, stern man walked in. Lieutenant Harris. In his hands was an iPad sealed inside a clear evidence bag, like something from a crime movie. He looked straight at me, his voice cold. "This is Jimmy's mother, Linda's work iPad. When we opened it, we found things I think you need to see. Linda Miller, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son Mark Miller was always proud of, Jimmy's mother." A chill ran down my spine. Linda worked at a large pharmaceutical company, always busy with meetings and trips. I remembered Jimmy telling me he had grabbed it by mistake, thinking it was his own for games. I scolded him for being careless, but never imagined the consequences would be this grave. Harris motioned for me to follow him into a small side room. When the door shut, all outside sounds disappeared. It was just me, him, and the iPad on the table. He powered it on. What appeared shattered my world. Not math worksheets or children's games, an entirely different world, dark and foreign. Long messages full of affection not meant for Mark, but for someone named Richard. Photos that weren't of family or Jimmy's birthdays, but shady, secretive images. Then bank transactions with enormous figures, business documents filled with terms I couldn't understand. I turned page after page, my hands shaking, throat tight as if strangled. What is this?" I whispered, broken. Harris didn't answer right away, just watched me with a mix of severity and pity. Finally, he said, "We're investigating, but what's here suggests Mrs. Linda is involved in very serious illegal activities." I collapsed into the chair, my body drained of strength. Linda, the daughter-in-law I once thought was the perfect wife and mother, hard-working, attentive, loving to her husband and child. I remembered the dinners she cooked, the way she smiled at Jimmy, the way she held Mark's hand. Now it all felt like a performance. I thought of Mark, my son, who had given her his whole heart, and Jimmy, the innocent child sitting outside, terrified and confused. Harris's deep, cold voice cut through my thoughts. "We'll be keeping this device for the investigation. You cannot take it home." I nodded like a machine, my hands still trembling. Images from the iPad kept circling in my mind. The messages, the numbers, the secrets I never dreamed existed in my family. I wanted to ask why, to understand, but my throat was dry. No words would come. A young officer walked in with a file. He read it out loud like routine paperwork. Evidence seized at Lincoln Elementary from student Jimmy Miller. 1 iPad. Serial number. I stopped, listening. All I felt was my hand shaking as I signed the report, the scrawl reflecting the chaos in my mind. Jimmy, that innocent child, was now caught in something even I, a 67-year-old woman with experience, couldn't grasp. A slim policewoman with a gentle voice approached him. "Come on, champ, let's go out to the playground for a bit," she said, trying to smile. Jimmy looked at me, eyes still red, then obediently took her hand. Watching his little back walk away tore at my heart. He was only 7. At that age, he should be running around with his friends, not curled up in an office surrounded by police. Miss Susan stood nearby, hands clasped, eyes filled with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sandra," she said shakily. "I only meant to open the iPad to check Jimmy's homework. I never imagined." I looked at her, wanting to say it wasn't her fault, that this was a terrible mistake, but I only managed a faint nod, too drained to speak. Inside my head, everything was tangled. Linda, my daughter-in-law, whom I had trusted, was now tied to things so dark I couldn't bear to imagine. As I left the office, I overheard the officers whispering. One name repeated, like another knife to my heart. Richard. I didn't know who he was, but the name alone sent a shiver through me. It was like a shadow, a threat I couldn't yet see. I gripped Jimmy's hand and led him out of the school. Parents still clustered, their curious eyes following us. I lowered my head and quickened my step. I just wanted to escape those stares. On the way home, in the taxi, the driver muttered, "Times are scary now. Kids bringing strange things to school." I didn't reply, just held Jimmy's hand tighter. He stared out the window in silence, but I knew he was scared. "Grandma," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take Mom's iPad." I hugged him, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," I whispered, but inside I knew this was. far beyond a simple mistake. At home, the house felt empty and cold. Mark had left early for work, so it was just Jimmy and me. In the heavy silence, I quickly made him a cup of chamomile tea, hoping the gentle aroma would calm him. Jimmy sat at the kitchen table, clutching the cup, eyes still distant. "Grandma, what will they do with Mom's iPad?" he asked. I had no answer, only stroked his hair and said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." On the table still lay the seizure report, my shaky signature a harsh reminder of what had just happened. I called Mark, let it ring, but no answer. I thought about calling Linda, but my hand froze. Harris's stern face, the messages, the photos on that iPad all flashed through my mind. I didn't dare face her. I didn't dare ask what she was hiding. That afternoon, I sent Jimmy to Mrs. Rosa, our kind neighbor. "I'm just going to the store for a bit," I lied, just to get a moment alone. But instead of shopping, I wandered the familiar streets, the iPad's images still swirling in my head, the sweet messages, the huge sums, the documents filled with secrets. I stopped, leaning against the trunk of an old tree, trying to breathe, to calm myself, but fear clung to me like a shadow that wouldn't let go. I thought of Mark, of the years we had together. When my husband died, Mark was the one who stayed by my side, my support. And now, I had to tell him the truth that the woman he loved, the mother of his child, might be living an entirely different life. My heart ached. I didn't want to shatter his happiness, but I also couldn't let Jimmy grow up in a family built on lies. That night, when Mark came home, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to tell my son the truth. I sat at the dining table, holding a cold cup of chamomile tea, watching Mark eat in silence. Jimmy had already finished and was playing with his toy cars in the corner. Linda was still there, playing the role of perfect wife and a mother. She cleared the table, smiled sweetly, chatted with Jimmy about his homework as if nothing had happened. Seeing her made me shiver. How could someone act so flawlessly when just hours before I had seen her terrible secrets on that iPad? I forced myself to stay calm, to hide the burning suspicion inside. I waited until Linda went into the bathroom and the sound of running water filled the house. Then I pulled Mark out onto the balcony. The night breeze carried the scent of eucalyptus from the neighbor's yard. Mark looked at me with weary eyes. "Mom, what is it? Why are you so tense?" he asked in his deep voice. I drew a long breath, trying to steady my thoughts. This was my son, the boy I had raised, watched grow. How could I tell him the woman he loved might be betraying him, that his family was on the brink of breaking? My voice trembled as I began. "Today, at Jimmy's school, I saw things I wish I didn't, but I can't keep them from you." I told him everything from Susan's panicked call, the police cars outside the school, to what I saw on Linda's iPad, the secret love messages, the massive bank transactions, the hidden documents. I poured it all out, because if I stopped, I'd lose the courage to continue. I saw it with my own eyes, Mark. The police are investigating, and they mentioned a name, Richard Salazar. Mark frowned, confusion filling his face, then shook his head as if to shake off my words. "Mom, that's absurd," he said in disbelief. "Linda is my wife, Jimmy's mother. She would never do that. It must be a mistake. Someone could have used her iPad, or it's some kind of cruel joke." I took his hand, trying to sound calm, though my heart pounded. "Mark, I don't want to believe it either, but I saw the messages, the photos, the numbers. The police have the iPad as evidence." Mark's patience seemed to snap. He pulled his hand away, tossed his cigarette to the ground, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're trying to make me doubt my own wife," he shouted louder than I'd ever heard. "Can't you see how tired I am? I work all day to support this family, and now you're telling me Linda is cheating on me?" His words pierced me like a knife. I wanted to scream back, to shake him awake, but I stood there helpless as he turned his back and walked inside. Just then, the bathroom door opened. Linda came out, hair damp, towel draped over her shoulders. She looked at us with surprise. "What's going on, honey?" she asked gently, though I caught a flicker of tension in her eyes. Mark turned to his wife, and instantly his gaze softened, as if every doubt had vanished in a heartbeat. "Nothing, sweetheart. Mom just worries too much. I always trust you," he said lightly, reassuring. Linda smiled, that perfect smile. But I caught the flicker of panic in her eyes before it was quickly buried beneath a mask of sweetness. "Mother, why would you think that about me?" she asked, her voice choked, as if she were about to cry. "What did I do wrong?" I wanted to shout, to tear away her facade, but I stayed silent. Her words felt like lines from a play, one I knew I couldn't win against. Not yet. That night's dinner was heavy as lead. We ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of spoons against plates and the muffled TV in the living room. Jimmy, sensitive as children often are, picked up on the tension. He looked at me, then at his father, whispering, "Dad, are you and Mom fighting?" Mark pulled his son closer, stroking his hair gently. "No, sweetheart, everything's fine," he said, though his shaky voice betrayed his own disbelief. I looked at Jimmy, my heart twisting. He didn't deserve this caught between truth and lies. Linda quietly cleared the dishes, glancing at me now and then. Those looks weren't those of a daughter-in-law anymore, but silent warnings. I tried to keep up the act of normalcy, pouring Jimmy another glass of water, though inside me was a storm. I knew she was probing, measuring how much I knew. After dinner, Linda suddenly stood, giving the excuse of work. "I have something urgent. I need to step out," she said, throwing on her coat, grabbing her purse, and leaving. Mark only nodded, as though used to her unexplained outings. I stood at the window, watching her figure shrink under the dim streetlight. She paused at the corner, pulled out her phone, and through the open crack of the window I heard her whisper, "Richard," her voice shaken. My heart froze. That name returned like a ghost, proof that what I had seen on the iPad wasn't some mistake. That night, once Jimmy had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen under the faint yellow glow. Fear still clung to me, but now it mixed with a steel resolve. I could not let my family fall apart. I could not let Jimmy grow up in lies. I knew I had to act, even if it meant facing the most painful truth. The next morning, while hanging laundry in the yard, the phone buzzed in my apron pocket, breaking the silence. I wiped my hands, my heart racing when I saw Lieutenant Harris's name on the screen. "Mrs. Sandra, we need you at the station right away to provide more information." His voice firm, direct. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and answered, "I'll be there." I rushed back inside, checking on Jimmy, who was sitting in the living room with his puzzles. He looked up, smiling innocently, though his eyes still carried yesterday's confusion. "Grandma, where are you going?" he asked softly. I brushed his hair, forcing a smile. "Just some errands, sweetheart. I'll ask Mrs. Rosa to stay with you." Jimmy nodded, but I knew he sensed my worry. I went to Rosa's house, our kind neighbor who had been with us for years. She was watering flowers, silver hair tucked beneath a straw hat. "Rosa, could you keep an eye on Jimmy for a bit?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Rosa looked at me with, Concern. Sandra, is something wrong? You've been tense these past days. I shook my head. It's just personal. Don't worry. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed doubt. The police station buzzed with noise and the smell of sweat and paperwork. A young clerk led me down a long corridor, the squeak of shoes echoing against the cold floor, into a small meeting room with frosted windows shielding us from curious eyes. Lieutenant Harris stood there, arms crossed, expression stern as ever. Beside him was a sharp-looking middle-aged woman in a deep blue suit. She rose, shook my hand firmly and with confidence. "I'm Prosecutor Fernanda Cruz," she introduced, voice clear. "I'll be overseeing this case." She slid a thick folder toward me, filled with pages of numbers, images, and printed words. "This is what we extracted from your daughter-in-law's iPad," she said, pointing to a marked figure on the first page. "Richard Salazar. He's the head of a major pharmaceutical corporation, but also our prime suspect in a case we've been tracking for a long time." I turned page after page, my heart pounding as I saw the banking records. Millions shifted between accounts across borders, emails written in dry professional tone covering something much darker. But what left me breathless were the internal documents contracts inflated, counterfeit drugs manufactured. There were photos of a river running dark with waste near a border town in Mexico. The same river kids from the neighborhood, Jimmy included, used to swim in on hot days. The thought that the water could have been poisoned made me shudder, my grip tightening on the table's edge. Cruz's gaze met mine, sharp yet sympathetic. "We've been tracking Salazar for years but lacked direct proof," she explained. "Your daughter-in-law's iPad is the key. It holds everything we need to break this network." I nodded, though my mind was spinning. Linda, the woman I once treated like a daughter, tied to something this vile. I wanted to ask why, to understand how she could betray her family, but my throat locked, no words emerging. Harris spoke then, his voice lower, edged with warning. "This also means you and your grandson are in danger. If Salazar or his men realize you've seen this, they won't let it slide." His words struck like a bucket of ice water. I froze, my hands clasped tight, fear coursing through me. I thought of Jimmy, his innocent smile. I thought of Mark, still blind in his love for his wife. If they discovered I was cooperating with the police, what would happen to us? I left the station with my head heavy as stone. Outside, reporters swarmed another suspect, microphones pressed to his face, camera flashes blinding. I tugged my hat low, slipped past the crowd, praying no one recognized me. On the bus ride home, I curled in a corner seat, staring out the window at the blurred cityscape, my mind locked on one thought: I must protect Jimmy at all costs. He was my light, the reason I was still standing through all this pain. I couldn't let the darkness touch him. When I opened the door at home, Linda was in the living room, holding a coffee cup. She looked up, her gaze cold, probing, as if trying to read everything I knew. "Where have you been? Why so long?" she asked softly, but her tone carried sharp undertones. I forced a smile, clutching my purse tight. "Oh, just at the market." My voice trembled. Linda nodded, but her eyes never left me, like a predator watching its prey. In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow, quietly watching the house that once was our home. Each morning, a weight pressed on my chest. I tried to keep Jimmy's life normal, taking him to school, cooking breakfast. But my mind never stopped circling Linda and her secrets. I knew I had to be cautious, to make everything look ordinary. Yet Linda's piercing stares each morning felt like walking on thin ice. I noticed Linda's constant attention to her phone. She sat across from me, coffee cup in hand, eyes fixed on the screen. Each time a message came, she flipped the phone face down instantly, hiding it. She pretended to be busy pouring milk for Jimmy, smiling sweetly when he chattered about his drawing from class. But I missed nothing, every move, every shift. She seemed to live in another world, one without me, without Mark, even without Jimmy. "Jimmy, finish your milk. Grandma will take you to school," I said, forcing a natural tone. Linda glanced up, then back down at her phone. "I've got an early meeting today," she told Mark evenly. "I'll be late tonight." Mark only nodded, asking no questions, as if her odd schedule was now routine. Watching this, my chest ached. My son, once strong, confident, was blind to the cracks spreading across his family. That afternoon, Linda claimed she had an urgent meeting. From the kitchen doorway, I watched her slip on a dark blue dress, spray perfume, smooth her hair. "What kind of meeting needs you dressed like that?" I blurted. Linda turned, smiled, but her smile never reached her eyes. "Important clients, Mom," she replied quickly, grabbing her purse and leaving. The door slammed shut, leaving a cold silence. Instinct told me something was wrong. I couldn't sit still. I hurried to Rosa's, asking her to watch Jimmy. "I've got urgent business, please keep him for a while," I said, trying to hide the panic in my voice. Rosa looked at me, worried. "Sandra, you've been so strange lately. Tell me what's going on, don't keep it inside." I only shook my head, thanked her, and left quickly. I hailed a taxi, heart pounding, and told the driver to follow Linda's car. "Please don't let her notice," I whispered, eyes locked on the white sedan ahead. The driver gave me a quick look in the mirror but said nothing, only nodded and pressed the gas. Linda's car stopped at a high-end shopping center. Glass. Towers glittering in the Sunday. I saw her step out, confident but glancing around nervously, as if waiting for someone. Then a sleek black SUV pulled up. A man in a suit and dark glasses stepped out, opening the door for her. I barely caught the license plate before she climbed in, and the SUV sped away, swallowed by traffic. I sat frozen, forcing the plate number into memory. The man's face blurred in my mind, but the ease with which Linda entered the car choked me, like a rope tightening around my neck. I told the driver to take me home, my thoughts in chaos. The image of the black SUV, Linda's furtive glance, it haunted me, confirming that what I saw on the iPad was no mistake. Days later, I was summoned again to the police station. In the small meeting room, Prosecutor Cruz and Lieutenant Harris awaited. "Mrs. Sandra, do you have new information?" Harris asked, eyes drilling into me. I took a breath and recounted everything from that day, Linda, leaving the SUV, the man, the plate number, my voice trembling. Harris noted it down, then turned to another officer, ordering a check. Minutes later, the officer returned, nodding. "That vehicle belongs to Richard Salazar." Cruz handed me a file containing a photo of Salazar at a charity event. He wore a sharp suit, his arrogant, false smile making me shiver. "This is Linda's lover," Cruz said firmly. "And the man leading the operation, he's behind the counterfeit drugs and money laundering." Linda's iPad had brought evidence closer to his arrest. I stared at the photo, blood chilling. Richard Salazar no longer a shadow, but flesh and blood, with that fake smile and cold eyes. I thought of Linda, still pretending to be a loving wife to Mark. My heart ached. How could she live two lives, a mother to Jimmy and Salazar's accomplice? That night, we all sat watching TV, but my mind wandered. Suddenly, the news praised Salazar for his major contributions to community health. His image filled the screen, applauded by a crowd. The sound of clapping hit me like hammers. I glanced at Linda. She smiled, but stiffly, hiding something. Mark didn't notice, his eyes fixed on the screen. Jimmy yawned, resting his head on my shoulder. Later that night, restless, I went for a glass of water in the kitchen. To my shock, Linda sat there in the dark, lit only by her phone's glow. I froze behind the doorway, heart hammering. She whispered sweetly but tense into the phone. "I love you, Richard," she said, with a radiant smile I'd never seen her give Mark. I was rooted to the spot, the world crashing down again. I crept back to my room, unable to sleep. On Saturday evening, the house seemed lighter. Mark and Jimmy sat cheering at a football game, laughter echoing through the living room. I was in the kitchen, slicing fruit, trying to savor the rare peace, though I knew it was only a thin curtain over the truth. Linda walked in, smiled warmly at Jimmy, then turned to Mark. "I need to make a work call. Urgent meeting, you know how it is." Her voice soft, natural. Mark nodded, eyes on the screen. "Sure, go ahead." She stepped into the study at the end of the hall, shutting the door. I set the knife down, unease rising like a tide. My feet carried me closer without thought. Passing the door, I froze at her sharp voice, nothing like the gentle tone before. "No, the police already have the iPad. If it leaks, we're finished," she nearly shouted, her voice shaking. My heart pounded. A deep, cold male voice growled through the speaker, loud enough for me to hear. "Calm down, Linda. If that old woman dares to open her mouth, we'll make sure she pays. You understand?" I froze, every limb numb. That old woman they threatened, that was me. The words cut straight through my heart, a brutal reminder that danger was no longer some distant fear, but right at my doorstep. Linda stayed silent for a moment before answering in a firm, steady voice. "I know. I'll handle it." I backed away step by step, careful not to make a sound, then rushed into the kitchen. Gripping the edge of the table, I gasped for breath, my chest rising and falling like I had just run a marathon. I looked down at the plate of fruit, neat slices of mango and watermelon, telling myself I had to act normal. If Linda realized I had been listening, if she even suspected I was watching her, I couldn't bear to think what might happen to Jimmy, to Mark, to all of us. Moments later, Linda emerged from the study, face calm, as if nothing had happened. But the instant she saw Mark and Jimmy, she put on that dazzling smile, as though the terrifying phone call had never existed. "Who wants fruit?" she asked sweetly, snatching the plate from my hands. Jimmy squealed with joy, running to his mother, while Mark smiled and wrapped him in a hug. I stood there, watching, an icy chill spreading through me. How could she act so perfectly? How could she smile at her child after plotting something so dark? That night the house felt heavier than ever. Jimmy accidentally spilled a glass of milk on the table, something trivial, something no one would normally notice. But Linda exploded. Her eyes flashed with fury. "This is all your fault," she snapped, her voice sharp as steel. "All our problems come from you." Jimmy froze, his wide eyes filling with fear, ready to cry. I knew she was really referring to the iPad he had brought to school, but those words were too cruel for a 7-year-old boy. Mark shot up, his hand on his wife's shoulder, his voice bewildered. "Linda, what are you saying? He's just a child." Linda forced a twisted smile that couldn't hide her tension. "I'm sorry. I'm just tired. Forget it." She bent down to wipe the milk, but glanced at me, an unspoken warning in her eyes. I pulled Jimmy into my arms as he sobbed into my shoulder. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking his back. "Grandma's here. I'll always protect you." But inside, I knew I was facing something far more dangerous than I had imagined. Sleep never came that night. Richard Salazar's voice echoed in my ears. "If that old woman dares to open her mouth." I lay in bed under the pale moonlight shining through the window, staring at the family photo on the wall. It was from Jimmy's birthday last year, when we were all smiling brightly. Now Linda's smile in that picture only gave me chills. I thought about Jimmy, about Mark, and wondered if I had the strength to face what was coming. The next morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I sent Jimmy to Rosa, telling her I was going shopping, but instead I went straight to the police station. In the small meeting room, Prosecutor Fernanda Cruz was waiting, her eyes sharp yet compassionate. I recounted every word I had overheard Linda's anxious voice, Richard's cold threat. He said if I spoke, I'd pay the price, I admitted, trembling. Cruz nodded, took notes, then looked up at me. "This is critical information, Mrs. Sandra. It proves Linda is working directly with Richard to cover up his crimes. We'll increase surveillance on her." Leaving the station, I felt a slight weight lift, but fear still pressed heavy on my chest. On the way home, as the bus passed a familiar corner, I glimpsed the same black SUV I had seen at the mall. Parked silently under a tree, its headlights blinked once like a warning. I shivered, clutching the scarf in my bag. Danger wasn't far away anymore. It was right in front of me. After that meeting, I returned home with my heart tied in knots. Cruz had told me they now had enough evidence to request a wiretap on Linda's phone, and that their team had already installed a device on it. "You must act completely normal," Cruz warned, her gaze stern. "Under no circumstance can she suspect. If Linda finds out you're cooperating with us, it will become much more dangerous." I nodded, but inside me was a storm of fear and determination. I couldn't let Jimmy, my only light, be dragged into this. In the days that followed, I lived like an actress, pretending calm around Linda. Each morning I brewed coffee, made Jimmy breakfast, laughed with him as if nothing were wrong. But every time I looked at Linda, I had to suppress the rage and pain burning inside me. She kept up her performance too, playing the perfect wife, hugging Jimmy, asking Mark about his work. But her eyes always swept over me, searching, as though looking for cracks in the mask I had built. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Lieutenant Harris. "Mrs. Sandra, we need you at the station immediately," he said urgently. I quickly left Jimmy with Rosa, using the market as an excuse again, and took a taxi to the station. In the small meeting room, it was just Harris, Cruz, and me. The tension was suffocating. Harris pressed play on a small recorder. Linda's voice rang out, cold as a knife through my chest. "Mark, it's nothing. I only need Richard. Once this blows over, we'll go to Miami together. And the boy, the old woman can take care of him." I collapsed into the chair, the world shattering once more. My heart ached, unable to believe Linda, the mother Jimmy loved, the wife Mark trusted blindly, could speak such cruel words. Not only was she betraying Mark, she was ready to abandon Jimmy, the child she once cradled and sang to sleep each night. Covering my face, tears streamed uncontrollably. "How could she?" I whispered hoarsely. Harris handed me a glass of water while Cruz spoke softly but firmly. "Now you have undeniable proof to show your son. We'll support you, but you must be strong." I wiped my tears, my mind fixed on one thought. Mark had to know the truth, even if it broke him. That night, I brought the recording home, my soul heavy. Jimmy played with his blocks in the living room while Mark came in from work, taking off his jacket. I waited until Jimmy went to his room, then pulled Mark outside to the yard. The autumn wind blew cool across us. "Mark, you need to hear this," I said, my voice shaking, handing him the recorder Harris had given me. He looked at me with doubt. "Again with this, Mom? I told you I don't want to hear any more nonsense about Linda." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Just this once, Mark. If I'm wrong, I'll never bring it up again. Just listen." My son hesitated, then finally took the device. When Linda's voice filled the air, I watched Mark's face shift doubt, turning to shock, then draining pale. Maybe this is edited," he muttered, but his voice trembled, betraying his disbelief. Just then, my phone rang. "Harris." I put it on speaker. His stern voice came through. "Mrs. Sandra, this recording was taken directly from official surveillance. It's authentic, unaltered." Mark sank into a chair, clutching his head, his eyes red. Jimmy rushed out of his room, sensing the tension. "Daddy, what's wrong?" he asked, clinging to his father's hand. Mark could only hug his son tightly, unable to speak. I knelt, stroked Jimmy's hair, forcing a smile. "It's all right, sweetheart. Daddy's just tired." That night, Linda came home late. She walked in with her perfect smile, but when she met Mark's eyes, it froze. He looked at her with pain and anger instead of love. Still, he forced normalcy. "How was your meeting, honey?" he asked. Linda nodded, her voice soft. "Fine, just tired." I stood there, heartbreaking as I watched. She didn't know Mark had heard the recording. She didn't know her curtain of lies was about to fall. The air in the house was thick, suffocating. Jimmy, sensing the tension, quietly retreated to his room, clutching his teddy bear. I watched him, my throat tight. He didn't deserve to be trapped between truth and lies. I wanted to hold him, promise everything. He would be fine, but I knew I couldn't. Days later, Cruz arrived at the house unannounced, wearing a long coat, her eyes serious. "Mrs. Sandra, we have news," she said gravely. "The surveillance shows Linda and Richard are planning to flee. They've bought plane tickets to Miami. We must act immediately." I collapsed into a chair, the ground falling from beneath me. Linda wasn't just betraying Mark, she was about to abandon Jimmy, to leave everything behind and run with Richard. My voice shook as I looked at Cruz. "What do I do now? Jimmy can't lose his mother like this." Cruz placed a hand on my shoulder, her gaze firm but compassionate. "We need your cooperation. Keep watching Linda, report anything unusual, and prepare yourself for the worst." Her words cut deep. What was the worst? That Jimmy would lose his mother? That Mark's heart would be shattered? Or that my family would be dragged into something even darker? At dawn the next morning, I jolted awake with a crushing sense of dread. I was washing dishes when the phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was Harris, his voice urgent, clipped. "Mrs. Sandra, we just confirmed Linda bought emergency tickets to Miami. The flight leaves tonight." I froze, the plate in my hand nearly slipping. Miami, the word sliced through me like a blade. Linda was really going to run. To leave Mark, leave Jimmy, leave everything to be with Richard Salazar. "Are you still there?" Harris's voice snapped me back. "I'm here," I stammered. "What do I do?" He spoke quickly. "We'll move in, but you need to tell Mark. He has to know the truth. And we need both of you to cooperate." I nodded, though he couldn't see. My heart felt like stone. I thought of Mark still blind in his devotion. I couldn't let him live in this lie. I threw on a coat, sent Jimmy to Rosa, and took a taxi to the construction site where Mark worked. When I arrived, he stood by a pile of materials, sweat soaking his blind shirt, his eyes weary. Seeing me, he looked startled. "Mom, what are you doing here? What's wrong?" I pulled him aside to a quiet corner. Tears welled as I said, "Mark, you have to come with me now. Linda is leaving. She bought tickets to Miami with Richard Salazar. You need to see it with your own eyes. If not, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." He stared at me, torn between pain and disbelief, shaking his head, his voice hoarse. "Mom, not this again." I grabbed his hands, cutting him off. "Please, Mark, just this once. If I'm wrong, I'll never speak of it again." He stayed silent for a long moment, eyes red, then finally nodded. "All right, Mom, I'll go." I hugged him, my heart breaking. I knew this truth would crush him, but I couldn't let him live in an illusion. That afternoon, police drove us to the airport. Harris explained the plan, his voice calm but resolute. "We have undercover agents posing as passengers, one team at security, another at the gate. Mrs. Sandra, Mark, you only need to be there to confirm Linda and Salazar. Don't do anything to raise suspicion." I nodded, clutching my sweat-soaked scarf. Mark sat beside me, staring out the window, searching for peace before the storm. The airport was chaos, voices and announcements blending in a noisy haze. We were taken to a discreet corner of the waiting area where we could see without being seen. I sat next to Mark, gripping his hand. He said nothing, but I could feel the tension in every breath. "Mom, if all this is true," he whispered, his voice breaking. I squeezed his hand. "I'm here, Mark. We'll get through this." Right on time, Linda appeared. She wore a long gray coat, dark glasses, dragging a large suitcase. Beside her was Richard Salazar, in a sharp suit, striding with arrogance. They laughed together, looking every bit like lovers on the verge of a romantic getaway. Pain stabbed through me. I glanced at Mark. He was frozen, rigid, his eyes blazing red, fists clenched. "See?" I whispered, tears welling. The moment Linda handed her passport to the airport clerk, a voice rang out. "Police! Nobody move! Richard Salazar and Linda Miller, you're under arrest." In an instant, undercover agents swarmed. Richard tried to run, but two officers slammed him to the ground. Linda shrieked, thrashing, "You're making a mistake. I'm innocent." Mark rushed forward, unable to hold back. "Why? Linda, why would you do this? What about Jimmy? What about this family? You threw it all away for him?" Linda flinched in panic, then quickly steeled herself, her voice cold. "You don't understand, Mark. You never will." Her words cut into my son's heart like a knife, leaving him hollow. I pulled Jimmy close, covering his eyes, whispering, "Don't look, sweetheart. Grandma's here." He trembled, his voice a whisper. "Grandma, what's wrong with Mommy? Why isn't she coming back?" I couldn't answer. I only held him tighter, listening to his little heart race. I wanted to shield him from this brutal truth that his mother had chosen a path where he no longer belonged. When the police led Linda and Richard away, Linda turned back, her eyes cold, hateful, as if placing all the blame on me. I stood there holding Jimmy, torn between pain and relief. The truth had come out, but my family was shattered. Mark stood frozen, his eyes hollow as he watched his wife. I wanted to run and embrace my son, to tell him everything would be all right, but I knew in that moment those words meant nothing. After they were arrested, we were taken straight to the station for statements. The patrol car sped through crowded streets, but my mind was only on Jimmy, who clung to me, his tiny hands gripping my blouse as if afraid he would lose me forever. I held him close, trying to share warmth, though I myself was drowning in a storm of emotions. Mark sat beside us, silent as a shadow, his eyes red, staring. Blankly, his heart broken. At the station, the air was suffocating with ringing phones and hurried footsteps. They led us to a small waiting room, the cold metal chairs deepening my loneliness. I cradled Jimmy, rubbing his back, whispering, "It's going to be all right, sweetheart." But even I didn't believe my own words. From the interrogation room came Linda's shrill voice. "I'm innocent. I don't know anything. You've got the wrong person." The angry pounding of Prosecutor Cruz's fist silenced her, but every denial felt like a blade cutting into me. Hours dragged on in that cold room. Jimmy fell asleep on my lap, his steady breathing the only thing keeping me grounded. Mark still sat there, his hands clenched white, wordless. I longed to comfort him, but what words could heal a man who had just lost the person he trusted most? At last, an officer came to tell us we could leave. "That's enough for today. We'll be in touch." The moment we stepped out, reporters swarmed us. Flashbulbs lit up, microphones shoved in our faces, questions raining down. "How is your family connected to Richard Salazar? How do you feel about your daughter-in-law's arrest?" I pulled my coat over Jimmy's face, desperate to shield his innocence from the headlines. Mark staggered, and I grabbed his hand, pulling him through the chaos, praying for a shred of peace. "I won't answer! Please, let us through!" I shouted, my voice raw with exhaustion and fury. When we finally reached home, Rosa was waiting at the door, her hair disheveled, eyes full of worry. "Oh my God, Sandra, I just saw the news," she said, her voice trembling. "How did it come to this?" I only shook my head, unable to speak. Tears welled, but I forced them back, not wanting Jimmy to see me weak. "Thank you, Rosa. Go home and rest. I'll be fine." But as she left, I felt the whole world collapse onto my shoulders. The house that once rang with Jimmy's and Mark's laughter now felt cold and empty. That night, none of us touched dinner. I had made Jimmy's favorite bean soup, but he only stared into the bowl, his eyes heavy with sadness. Mark sat alone in the corner, half a bottle of tequila drained, mumbling hoarsely, "All my life I trusted the wrong person. I believed in her, Mom." His words crushed me. I wanted to tell him it would be all right, but I knew those words were hollow now. Mark had lost the woman he loved, and Jimmy had lost the mother he adored. The boy clung to me, whispering, "Grandma, where did Mommy go? Why isn't she coming back?" That question pierced straight into my heart. I hugged him tightly, tears slipping down my cheeks. "She had to go away for a while, sweetheart. But I'm here. I'll always be here." He nodded, but I knew he didn't understand. How could a 7-year-old grasp that his mother had chosen a life without him? That night, as I tucked Jimmy into bed, the TV in the living room blared the evening news. The image of Linda in handcuffs, head bowed, being led through the station hallway flashed across the screen. I sat there holding my grandson, my heart sinking, knowing our family would never be the same. Jimmy, not yet asleep, caught a glimpse of the broadcast. He burst into tears, crying out for his mother. I pulled him into my arms, quickly changing the channel, but I knew that image was burned into his little mind. "Why is Mommy wearing handcuffs, Grandma?" he asked through tears streaming down his face. I held him closer, choking on words I couldn't find. "I don't know either, sweetheart," I whispered, my tears falling with his. "But I promise I'll always protect you." After the broadcast, my phone rang. It was Prosecutor Cruz. "Mrs. Sandra, thank you for your cooperation in this operation," she said, her voice firm yet compassionate. "We've arrested Richard Salazar and Linda, but the case isn't over. You'll be a key witness in the Cotto trial." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "I understand. I'll do what I must," I answered hoarsely. The weeks after the airport arrest were a whirlwind. Mark took unpaid leave to stay home with Jimmy, not wanting him exposed to the stares and whispers of the world outside. I watched my son once, so strong now hollowed, his eyes red, drained of tears after sleepless nights. I longed to comfort him, but no words could heal the wound Linda had left. Jimmy, meanwhile, asked every day, "Grandma, when is Mommy coming home?" His wide eyes shone with hope. Each time, my heart clenched. I couldn't tell him the brutal truth that his mother had chosen a path without him. So I dodged, spun vague stories, took him to the park, bought him ice cream, trying to fill the void with fleeting moments of joy. But even in his laughter, I saw sadness lingering in his eyes. 7 years old, too young to understand, yet old enough to feel the loss. I had to return to the station many times, working with Prosecutor Cruz and Lieutenant Harris. They asked me to recount every detail, what I'd seen on the iPad, the call I overheard, Linda's hateful glare at the airport. Each retelling reopened wounds, but I knew I couldn't stop. "You're doing the right thing," Cruz told me, her eyes sharp yet kind. "Because of you, we dismantled a powerful crime network." I nodded, but relief never came. Yes, Richard's empire had fallen, but my family had paid with scars that would never heal. The press would not leave us alone. They camped outside our home, cameras ready to capture every step. Once, on my way to the market, I was cornered before I even reached the street. "How do you feel being betrayed by your own daughter-in-law?" one shouted, shoving a microphone near my face. "Did you know about her crimes?" I bowed my head, gripping my grocery bag as if it were my last strength, and slipped through the crowd. "Please leave us alone," I begged, trembling. But they didn't relent. At home, I locked the doors, drew the curtains, fighting to carve out some peace for Mark and Jimmy, knowing we couldn't hide forever. One night, after Jimmy was asleep, Mark sat beside me on the porch. The wind carried the scent of eucalyptus. My son placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice breaking. "Mom, I was so blind. I didn't believe you. I refused to see the truth. If it weren't for you, I would have lost everything." Tears streamed down his face. For the first time in weeks, I saw him cry. I held him, patting his back as I once did when he was little. "You haven't lost everything, Mark. You still have Jimmy. You still have me. We'll get through this." He nodded, but I knew the pain would not fade easily. The trial came months later. I chose not to bring Jimmy, though he begged, "Grandma, I want to see Mommy." I couldn't let him see his mother on the defendant's bench, didn't want that image etched in his memory forever. On sentencing day, I sat in the front row, facing Linda and Richard. Linda was convicted of collusion and money laundering. Richard received the harshest sentence for running the counterfeit drug empire and poisoning the environment. The case dragged down several high-ranking officials, shaking the pharmaceutical industry. But when I looked at Linda, her hair disheveled, head bowed, I felt no triumph. Only sorrow for a woman who had lost everything to ambition and deceit. Coming home after the trial felt like waking from a long nightmare. Mark stood at the door, bringing Jimmy back from Rosa's house. The boy ran to me, shouting, "Grandma, I drew a picture today. I want to show you." I smiled, ruffling his hair, relieved to see his innocent grin. We sat in the yard as I brewed chamomile tea, its fragrance filling the air. Mark sat beside me while Jimmy chased butterflies through the garden. The sunset bathed the garden in gold. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Watching Jimmy, I thought of the painful road behind us. Who could have imagined that a single iPad would unravel such a web of lies? The truth had been cruel, tearing my family apart. But I would rather face it than live forever in a false happiness. I bent down, kissed Jimmy's forehead, whispering, "Grandma loves you, my boy." Sitting in the glow of dusk, I promised myself I would do everything to hold together what remained of this family. Jimmy needed me, Mark needed me, and I needed them to keep going. Life had taught me its final lesson. Truth, no matter how brutal, is worth facing. Only it can open the path to healing and new beginnings. I watched Jimmy's laughter light up the garden, as bright as the sun chasing away the shadows. And I knew, no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, one step at a time. Looking back at everything we endured, I realized the deepest pain often comes from those we trust most. Yet from that pain comes the discovery of love's true strength between a mother and her son, between a grandmother and her grandson, the kind of love that lifts us through our darkest days. I no longer wished for the perfect family we once pretended to be. All I wanted was to protect what remained with all my heart. Perhaps all of us will face a truth too heavy to bear someday. The question is, do we close our eyes and cling to illusion, or do we face it and finally find real peace? I would love to hear your thoughts. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Share your reflections, because maybe your story could be a light for someone else out there. And if you want to stay with me through more journeys of hardship, of lessons, of love, follow along so you won't miss the next story. Because I believe every story is a mirror, reflecting the human heart and helping us grow stronger as we walk this road of life.